Do you need an LLC for your podcast? 3 ways that an LLC can save your bacon. Hi, everybody. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and this framing is weird, so let me fix that really quickly here. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and this is Legit Podcast Pro, my regular Thursday afternoon approach to sharing a little bit of news and information and knowledge and background on things so you can create your stuff with confidence, get your message out, and make an impact on the world. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this opening. Okay, there's the bad framing again. Let's unzoom. There we go. So whether you are a podcaster, a YouTuber, a filmmaker, a stage producer, or any other kind of media creator, having an LLC is an important business step that I think everybody should consider. It's not always necessary. It's not always right for you, but it is often the right solution. And so I just thought I would do a quick share today on some of the ways that an LLC can really save your ass, your bacon. So first off, and this is the one that I think is sort of the most important. It's not the one that everybody talks about the most, but the one that I think is the huge important one is that it acts as sort of a prenup for the members' roles and rights and responsibilities. You know, I'm often talking about the need for a podcast prenup. That's some kind of a document, some kind of an agreement that locks in the members, the partners, the group's understanding of who's responsible for what, who owns what, who gets what, and what happens if. And that prenup is tremendously, tremendously important because your team can often be your biggest asset, but it can also be your biggest area of risk. And so having things clearly laid out is super important. Now, even if you are not yet working with a team, having the LLC is a great way to get started and lay the foundation for bringing in that team, because then your LLC becomes the employer or the contractor with the team, and that helps to clarify those kinds of things as well. So in a world where copyright authorship equals ownership, and when people working together come together and create something, they are considered joint owners, joint authors, unless they have something clear in writing that says otherwise, that says who does own the output of what they do. And so when people work for an LLC and have a proper employment relationship or independent contractor agreement or a membership agreement, operating agreement within the LLC, it can lay out the necessary work made for hire language to make sure that the company owns the work. Then you can divvy up and decide who owns pieces of the company, but whoever is in charge of running the company retains control over how those things, those assets that belong to the company are handled and disposed of and exploited and turned into money and all that kind of good stuff. So number one, it acts as that prenup and really helps lay out the rules. The second one, this is the one that everybody talks about. It shields the members of the company from liability. It's called a limited liability company, after all. And that intellectual property that they create can carry with it liability if it infringes other people's IP, if it infringes people's personal rights. It can be liability that relates to contract claims from something that happens with the business, the company, saying or doing something or breaking a contract or having a problem with someone it hires or those kinds of things. All of those could result in liability to the company. And if you don't have an LLC in place, you, the owner or owners of the company, are going to be held personally liable for everything that happens in the company. So the LLC is a great way to have some sort of legal separateness. And that separateness is what shields the individual owners from liability related to the company, and also the company liability shields them from liability for things that the owners get into. And that can also be a big issue if you have a co-owner who gets into some hot water. You might end up finding yourself in business, a partnership with their creditors now. And so that's another kind of thing to be thinking about. A third way that an LLC can be used that is very effective and can really save you in times of need is to finance your operations, because you can sell pieces of the company, equity in the LLC, to raise money for the company's operations, or to buy new equipment, or build out a new studio, or whatever it is that you want to do. I'm going to sneeze here in a second. um, Whatever it is that you want to do, you may need some extra cash for. You could go into debt and borrow money to do that, of course, or you could fund it out of your own pocket if you're so inclined. But if you have an LLC, you could actually take on investors as a way of doing that. If you're starting, say, a podcast network or something like that, this is a great way to get the runway, the financial runway that you need to get off the ground and into the air for flight. So using a company structure as a way of bringing in investment capital, equity investment, is another really strong way. A couple of other valid reasons to get an LLC. There can be tax savings. The LLC can sometimes make purchases, investments in things that an individual wouldn't be able to deduct from their taxes, but the company can. It depends on being set up quite correctly, and you need to talk to your accountants and tax advisors about this kind of thing. But tax advantages can exist in LLCs, and it's certainly worth looking at for that, as well as just the street cred. People like to deal with companies. They like to know that there's some sort of a sense of solidity with a company, a stability that arises from working with a business. And so when the company is making contracts rather than the individuals, it just feels a little more solid and stable, and that has a fairly profound, if unconscious, impact on how people relate to the company. So those are your 5 great reasons to have an LLC. It acts as a prenup for the members' roles, rights, and responsibilities. It can shield the members from liabilities related to the business, and vice versa. It can be used as a financing tool. It can result in some tax advantages, and there is street cred that goes with being a company, especially after you've been in business for a little while. Holding all the assets of the company in the company's name keeps that separateness, and that's really valuable as well. So, does everybody need an LLC? Absolutely not. It is not right for everybody. Depending on where you live, the cost of running an LLC could be prohibitive. It could be just too much to justify. When the risk is relatively low, and let's say you're a solo operator, maybe you're better off just socking some money away to deal with any eventualities, and maybe buy some insurance or something like that. If in some states, the cost of starting an LLC is negligible, under $100. In other places, there's an ongoing tax expense on a year-to-year basis. Another question that comes up a lot for LLCs is, where should I file my LLC? The usual answer, my best answer, is unless there's a good, solid reason for doing it somewhere else, your home state where you live and work is the right place. But yes, it's cheaper in some places than others. So some people do go to Nevada or Wyoming or Texas, and even Delaware is very common. There are some reasons that bigger companies like to form their entities in Delaware that probably don't matter much for smaller LLCs and things like that, but something to be thinking about there. But then you have to register in your home state as well, because anywhere where you are doing a substantial piece of your business, you are required to be registered. And that basically means signing up to pay taxes. So, for example, people who operate here in California, they may think, well, I'm going to save money because I don't have to pay that $800 tax to the state of California. But the fact is, they go to Nevada, form their corporation, they go have their meeting in Las Vegas, and then they come back to LA where they do all their work. They're operating in California. And if there's ever a problem that calls for resort to the courts or anything like that, well, they're going to find themselves having some hurdles to overcome to get access to the courts in California if they need to do that. So registering in the home state is a side effect of forming in another state. So unless if you have a co-host who's in the other state, that makes sense. That's sometimes a good way to do it. But most of the time, I say just register in your home state. What other questions come up in the nature of the LLC thing? Another good reason for having an LLC is that by gathering everything together and putting it into the LLC, if and when the time comes for there to be an exit strategy, it's very easy to sell the company or sell the company's assets, but you can sell the whole company in one transaction along with all of its assets. rather than having to, do a transfer of each episode of the podcast, each brand, each trademark, each design, all the web pages, everything. It can all be transferred in one fell swoop transaction, and that's a little easier and frankly just a lot easier to get your head around sometimes. So exit strategy is another great reason to have an LLC. I'm here every Thursday afternoon, usually a little after 4 p.m. to do this show, and I would love to answer your questions. If you have comments or questions, you can drop them in the comments on this post, whether live or when you're watching on the recording. If you're watching it later, say hashtag replay so I know, and I'll get notified that you watched it. I'd love to hear from you. And be sure to send in your questions. I love to answer these kinds of things. And with that, I will say don't forget to join the Legit Podcast Pro group. This show is brought to you by Legit Podcast Pro, a free membership community on Facebook and elsewhere. And all you have to do to join it is go over to legitpodcastpro.com right there on your screen and give me your email address, then pop over to Facebook, sign up for the group. If you're not a Facebook user, that's okay. Get your name on the email and we'll be sure to be in touch with you as we do stuff. But I often have weekend sessions and other kinds of trainings and things that I'll do specifically for the group. And I would love for you to be a part of that as well. So thanks for being here. This is Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and you've been watching Legit Podcast Pro. I'll see you again next time.